Welcome to the Seven Crosses series for Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. Now, I've given this video a title of a new start and a map overview simply because I think this is the point where this series needs to come to an end. After a run of over a year, in fact, I think I started the first video in June 2021, so it's more than a year. And there's various reasons for doing that, but probably the biggest one is the fact that with the new Metro update coming out, and it's quite surprising actually, because if you follow the series, you'll be aware we've been through crime and justice, water, several big updates which I thought would destroy the economy, and we managed to get through those. But the mechanic that sunk me is the introduction of realistic mode, increasingly thinking about what I want to do, and it's this reason why this series will effectively come to an end. Having said that, it may reappear if there's some reason in a future update to illustrate some point that I can't do in the new series. Now, this video is actually going to consist of 3 parts. In the first part, I'm just going to give you an update of the current situation, especially with respect to the effects of electronics on my economy. And the second part is in response to a request from the previous video about would I be prepared to do a map review, talk about the economy, talk about the successes and the failures and the general condition of the economy. And then at the end, what I'll do is talk very briefly about what I'll be doing going forward. So that out of the way, I suppose the best thing to talk about, well, I'll start with something simple first because this could get a little bit involved. I just want to show you the new buildings that were added as part of a recent small update. Now, I've already done a separate video on this. I've just let the game run. So I just want to highlight these buildings in case anyone missed that video. The other thing I also am starting to increasingly notice is performance issues in this city here. And I think it's down to the sheer amount of what's going on. But what we got here is a surface end station and a surface metro small station and a surface large stations. These are all metros, and one comment I did get was, can you connect all normal rail to it? And the answer is no. As you can see, you put away, it says only metro track can be connected here. That also applies to the end station. So although we got some nice looking stations here, you can't actually integrate them into an existing rail system. The game clearly defines between the two. Now, another thing I want to show you, hopefully is a curious effect I've spotted due to the tourist line here. If I come here and click, what you see is we've got 13 tourists here. Now this tram has just come in, and of course he's taken them all away. That was not meant to happen. Never mind. I'll try and explain it. What I've found is that the hotels down here are full up. In fact, mainly due to shortages of staff. I think what I do need to do is pump them right up again, and I think I've got the spare workforce. We're running at 4% unemployment, so. But I deliberately tried to keep the workforce low in order to illustrate the point, because what I've noticed, because well, last time I was playing this, there was 100 tourists stood here. And what I found is that because there was no accommodation for them over here, rather than a lot of them piling up outside waiting for, it says here, guests without service, what they seem to do is come down across the map to this last pickup point and then just stand there. If you're moving large numbers of tourists, especially through a busy hub like this, well, it is busy often, it might pay to make sure you've got the capacity. Otherwise, because one of the other things I've started to notice, I don't know, again, it's a bit unpredictable, is that some stations are starting to fill up occasionally, and that's blocking the movement of workers. So that is something else that you need to keep an eye on. But I think generally overall that this public transport system is working. I am getting a fairly consistent workforce all the way out, which is something that quite surprised actually. I'll be honest. I think if I could grow the city, I could ramp up the workforce in this area. So we're nearly halfway through producing our first aircraft, and we are getting a fairly smooth maybe we're just kind of push up the workforce in here. Got this is full, and maybe we can get a few more out here. And I think if you are setting up a public transport system like this and you've got large industries, you do need to scale them up fairly slowly. If you just leave them on maximum workforce, what probably would happen is that you'd get a lot of people in here, because this can take 370 workers. You've got to remember 370 workers translates into 1,100 workforce in a city, because you need 3 times to cover the 3-shift pattern. So you imagine that factory needs 1,100. And of course out here we've still got workers in here. I'm actually mining the bauxite, and then this factory is another 350, which is that's nearly 1,050. That's you can say that's 2,000 workers for there. Then of course the aircraft production line here is another 1,500. So if you add that together, that's 3,500 workers per shift. So for this city to keep everybody working, plus all the ancillary stuff, you're probably talking you need a population of about 12,000 here, which is nowhere near it at the moment. Now I think that now comes on to what is started to go wrong, and because I was looking at Metro, I think I've expanded this city too fast. And what actually happens, I come to the economy, we go back to what you'll see is if I come to imports, you can see in the month of July I actually imported 105 million worth of electronics. It only translated to 32 tons, and because of that I didn't actually make any real money. I did make a little bit of a loss due to other things, but you can see the biggest loss is the fact that I only exported 44 million. Now there was a slight problem there in the fact that my steel stopped exporting, and I had to fix that. But as you can see, this import cost is starting to drag the whole economy down, and the result of that is I lost about 70 million rubles. Now if I come to this month, you can see I actually made 108 million rubles, and the reason for that is that I've quite seriously restricted the import of electronics, though you can still see it's still bumping along quite successfully. In fact, if we take the start date back to July, back to there, and then we look at electronics, you can see the massive spikes that are happening, because, and I think part of that is driven by my expansion in this city, and 2, that I've had a number of problems with electronics related back to chemicals, if any of you have watched the previous videos. And electronics now is becoming absolutely crippling, and that is something that I will be talking about a little bit later on, is the distribution system. Because if I come into here, if I can find electronics, you can see I've actually got spread around the map 243 tons of electronics. I've got a lot of electronics on the map, and you've got 8, and I've got 18 on the move. The problem is that the electronics are not getting to where they're meant to be, and then that's actually starting to reduce the happiness. And of course, since the crime and justice update, happiness then leads into productivity. In fact, I think, and you can see again with respect to meat, I've got over 1,100 tons of meat in the economy, of 149 tons on the move, and you can see there I've got 959 tons of meat in buildings. And then again, if I go back to electronics, you can see there I've got 225 tons of electronics in buildings. But the trouble is they're in the wrong place. And if I show you here what I've got here, if I turn on the happiness, you can see the happiness down here is 60%, 68%, and it does come down to the fact that this town has no electronics. Of course, the problem with that is that this is the area that's producing my food, and then that's actually knocking onto my food supply. And this is the problem with the sheer size of the map, that the economy's starting to come unraveled. And I mean, I've got every confidence I could fix it, but to fix it, I would take a long time of very close monitoring. And this is another reason why I'm bringing the series to an end, because 10 videos of me literally going around checking the minutiae of every individual settlement is going to be, well, it won't be very interesting to watch. The other problem also got now is, if we switch to loyalty here, I've got falling loyalty. And again, that's partly due to the fact that because I've been growing the economy because I've been so focused on Metro, I haven't been paying attention to what's causing the drops in loyalty in different places. And of course, if loyalty drops, I think the average loyalty we got now is 61%, which is nowhere near high enough. Again, this is something I would have to work on quite considerably to keep this economy going. Probably another example is the fact that we're farming through here, but next winter cycle we may actually start to run short of crops as well, again because of that rapid growth, because I think I've put on nearly 20,000 people in just a couple of years, and that is way too fast for an economy that's got certain shortages. Anyway guys, that's the current status. That is the current status. The economy is in trouble. It could be fixed, but it'd be a long process, and it's not really worth recording. What I'll probably do is work on it off camera just to keep the series going, so that when the next update comes out and we got to it's something radical, then I might be able to use this series to illustrate certain points. But I have looked at the roadmap, and I think the next update is actually introducing small buildings, which would be a great addition to the game. But I didn't see any mechanics in there that would be a game changer. But of course, the roadmap's quite old, so that could change, because the devs have hinted at introducing waste to the economy. And of course, the addition of waste to this economy would be an absolute nightmare. So what I want to do now is just move on to the second part, and I suppose I better start with a little bit of a history lesson with respect to this series. Now, as I've already previously mentioned, this series started in June 2021, and the original idea was, because I created this map for a specific goal, was that there were 7 crosses on the map, and the idea was to build a settlement on all 7 crosses. Well, from that objective, I've probably not done that very well, and the reason for saying that is that there's the crosses on the outer islands. I think there's still 4, or was it 3? I think there's no, I think there's 3 that I still haven't reached. There's one here, and one over there, although this one technically could be developed into a settlement. For my overall goals with this series, it's a partial success, but at the same time, this is by far the biggest economy I've ever built in this game, and it's had its ups and downs. So I think what we'll do is we'll just talk a little bit about the starting location, because what we did is we started down here with a small crew. They came in here and we created a work camp here, which is long since disappeared. And this was our kind of starting location that's kind of evolved over time. And I think that initial start went quite well. I know there was a bit of controversy with some of you guys over the fact I was using a workers camp, but I think from the point of view of the fact I started in 1947, it just felt realistic rather than plonking down a fully developed city. Now, I may be making a video and talking about realistic starts, and that's one of the issues I will be doing if I get the time to actually put that short series together. So this is Knife Edge. It got off to a fairly good start, and then when this farm went through several evolutions because it wasn't very well laid out, and also the field structure was focused too much on medium. And of course we had that update where we got the new farms in. If I show you here, up here now, we've got the new format farms where you can have all the vehicles in here. They're much bigger. I think this is the medium farm. I think the large farm is up here. And the addition of these farms completely changed the nature of farming, because as you can see here, rather than having distribution offices, you can now have a large farm that can both sow, harvest and collect the crops, as long as it's connected to a large silo. Where if you compare it with this kind of old-fashioned farm, is probably the polite way of saying it, this is the way farms would have been set up prior to that update, where you'd have had the normal agri farm here, which was just had the equipment in it, and then you'd have a couple of distribution offices here with all the trucks in to do the collecting, and then they would be hooked up to a couple of silos over here, which the distribution trucks would deliver to. This is obviously full up. So over time, the field pattern here changed, so to accommodate that change in the game. And of course, what we did is we expanded to Coalville here. Coalville's original plan was to provide workers to these coal mines over here, and I think this worked very well. The only difference now with the metro system is that I would probably now, if I was doing this again, I would probably consider putting a surface metro system out here. The reason for that is capacity, because again, if you look at these little trams here, or they're not trams really, they're called trams in the old name, but they're really rail buses. You can see that they've got a capacity of 95. If you compare it with the metro trains. So if we go to metro, and you can see that these ones here have got a capacity of 500 passengers. I think this is the smallest, 189. So if I was doing this again, I would seriously look at using a surface metro line. It probably would still pick up like it does here, but of course we'd have to accommodate the end station. So what I probably would do is have maybe I'd have a loop like that, so the metro line would come into a station here and then go this way, so that the end station wasn't actually going into the city. And then what that would do is guarantee that we'd get a absolute full, oops, that's a fire station, we'd get a completely full workforce out here, and with these ore processing plants. And of course I never ever did get around to building the third one, because I never needed it. This worked quite well, and of course, if any of you follow the series, you'll be aware of the kind of checkered history of my steel mills. Because in the beginning, I built two small steel mills, one which is still going, and all it does now really is just produce mechanical components for export. So it's an export steel mill. And of course, we had another steel mill in Knife Edge, and I think it did work after a principle, but I think if I was going to do it again, I probably wouldn't have put a steel mill here. What I would have done is probably put a bigger steel mill here and made this into slightly more of a permanent setup. But my thought at the time was that this Coalville was to provide workers to the coal mines, and of course tucked in this corner, which is a little bit neglected. And again, I think this worked quite well. This is the one and only brick factory on the map. This brick factory has supplied all the bricks I've used to build this whole economy, and I think that's probably a good segue into what I feel is probably the biggest success of this series, and I think it worked very well, and that is that this whole central gravel production area here, and what I've got is loads and loads of gravel mines here, and we've got only, and of course it's all full up now because I'm not building very much. And I built two gravel processing plants here, and we got two stores. And what I did was I've connected them to two aggregate rail connectors, plus also tucked in here is a helicopter pickup point. And similar to the bricks, this has been the single center for all the gravel I've used on the map. I've got no other gravel production. Everything has come from that, and I think building this relatively early in the games, it's one of my first objectives, was a major step forward, because what I've been able to do is use this as a single point for delivering gravel all around the map, both for construction and production. And I think that makes a very big difference, because even for the asphalt plants, which I put out here, because the actual construction sites, moving those out, so I've kind of lost the map again, sorry about this. I think having the gravel being produced in, or the key construction resources being produced in one point, is probably the best way to go, and then shipping out the gravel to here, to a construction distribution center here. This one is for asphalts and concrete, because one of the big issues that when you are expanding on across the map is keeping the asphalt and concrete in range of the construction offices as you push out. One key lesson I will say that I've picked up from this series is that it pays to move the cheaper, bulky materials like gravel, prefab, steel, and bricks using trains, rather than trying to move concrete and the smaller items. But I'll talk a little bit more about the distribution network in a little while. So this gravel, I would say one of my major successes, where Colville was a partial success. Now Ollerton over here, which is originally intended to be a coal production area, that was the whole role of Ollerton in the original grand plan, because we had some coal mines over here. In fact, we had quite a lot of coal in this area, and the idea is that Ollerton would be similar to Colville, but this would be producing the domestic coal. So if you imagine that Colville was going to drive the coal mines that were going to run the steel plant, which is in Stilton, Ollerton was going to be the source of the domestic coal, and that's all that Ollerton was meant to do. I'm just going to pause because I don't really want to go into winter, because then you won't be able to see things. But what happened here, and this is, if I was trying to be upbeat, I would say Ollerton was a triumph of adaptation over planning. Because of the need for fuel, I put in an oil refinery in here, and well, I'll be generous, it's worked, but I wouldn't say this is one of the more greater successes, simply because Ollerton has struggled to keep everything manned here, where this area here, except for the power station, again the power station was a bit of an odd add-on. This became my center for the production of prefabs, and I think it was just prefabs, and again this was pre-planned, in the sense that the idea was that we'd produce coal here, and the cement plant here needed coal, and of course the gravel was brought in from Knife Edge. So the idea was it would be an integrated production system, and we would produce all the prefabs here. But of course, if any of you watched the early part of the series, I did have, sorry for jumping across the map, I did have a production area in here for the early part of the game. We produced bricks here. I think we had a little brick factory down here, although it turned into boards. We also had I think we still got the chemical cement plant here. This is what's left of my original construction in manufacturing base. I think in here we had a prefab factory. Oh no, the prefab factory is still here as well. Although I think all this does now is just export. And then we had a chemical plant there. I think it was was it a cement plant? No, I can't remember now. Sorry, it's been such a long time. Because this is one of the features of Knife Edge, was that it was a bit of a Swiss Army knife of production in the early game. Of course, now it's gone very quiet. We've got a few vestiges left here. Anyway, I'm digressing. Ollerton has become a little bit of a mess from the original plan, because my original plan was to have all my oil, fuel, and you can say oil products produced in this area because it was close to the oil field. But that didn't work because of Ollerton over here. So that was something that kind of worked, but it's not. I'm not completely happy with it. While we're here, we got our little tourist town over here. This was very much an experiment, and in its own odd way. I mean, it's a tiny little town, and it's had its problems. But I think as a tourist centre, it kind of worked. And you can see here again the effects of the electronics. We've also got a problem with food supply, because of course one thing that is worth noting about when you're running a distribution center, the game seems to distribute in a kind of radiating format. So if you've got a small place like this way out on the edge of the map, it doesn't really get the regular supplies compared to closer ones. And again, that's something I'll do when I talk about distribution centers. This was an experiment, but you can see it's got all sorts of problems with food and electronics, and the happiness has gone completely through the basement. See, 27%. I can imagine what the productivity is, because of course productivity is yeah, we've got average productivity of 30% out here. Luckily, this is a tourist town. We're still getting tourists in here, and I'm not sure how productivity affects tourists, but because this isn't producing anything for the economy, quite happily just ignore it. Now, if we come over to, I'm just going to work across the map. Now we're getting into an area where things didn't go as well as I hoped, and I made a couple of quite big mistakes here. And that is Foodville. And in principle, Foodville worked. It was meant to produce meat, but I think that I put too much hope on Foodville being able to supply the map. And truthfully, meat production is something that can't be centralized. In fact, there's kind of 3 products which can't be centralized from a distribution point of view. One is electronics. I'll talk a bit more about that. Chemicals, and meat. And the reason for that is that compared to like steel, which you can load up a train with 300 tons and ship it, these are both needed in places in relatively small concentrations. And that's kind of reflected. If I show you the shop here, you can see that shops have 1 ton of meat or 2 tons of meat, and electronics. Why have you no electronics in here? That's a bit odd. Anyway, back to meat. So my original plan was to produce all the map's meat in this area and ship it by truck. The big mistake I made was not giving it a rail connection, which means that all the meat has to be trucked all the way over to here. So I made a bit of a comeback here by putting this in here, and you can see this is where the meat's piling up, but it's not worked very well, especially in the winter. And this is one thing I've noticed, that with respect to the items which are shipped by truck, what happens in the winter, everything slows down and happiness tends to drop. So Foodville, not particularly that good a success. Could have been a lot better. And if I had to say that what lesson I learned from Foodville is that meat production needs to be distributed. And I think that's why up here now we've got another meat center here. And if I was going to plan this map again, I would probably have 4 meat production areas, which effectively just producing the meat for the local segments of the map. So that is the meat production, Foodville. Over here is probably another success story. I think I've worked this out quite well. What I did is I built this whole dedicated town. Ignore the production area over here because it's inconsequential, because the staff here are non-existent. And I think having this area here with effectively what I've got here is 2 fabric factories, and I think this combination of 1 fabric factory, which you can see produces 5 tons of fabric, feeding into 2 clothing factories is the way to go. I think this was quite a big success. And this actual center has produced virtually all the clothes for the entire map, right up until about a population of about 90 odd thousand. It's only now started to come under pressure due to the fact that the population is now over 100,000. So I'd say that this is one of the good success stories, because of course what I did do was put in a rail network here, and of course we've got a rail distribution offices, and rail distribution offices were a complete game changer. But again, I will talk about those in a little while. Coming over to Stilton, I would say Stilton was a partial success for two reasons. One, it worked, but the problem again is this communication system here. If I was doing this again, similar to what I said about Colville, this is the place where I would be looking to put in a metro system, because I built this horrible thing here because this was built pre the metro update, obviously, because it was built a very long time ago. And I think this shows that what I could have done. And I think what I probably would do is put in a surface metro system here, end to end, going out to here, or possibly even an underground one with an underground station on this side and an underground station on that side. And then what that would mean is that we could move all passengers between these two stations, which would give us better coverage. And then of course we'd have the extension out to this area with the steel production here. The downside, I think, with Stilton is I was too ambitious with respect to the number of people I could get into this city to drive 2 steel mills, 3 ore processing plants, plus the vehicle production. Here you can see I've got nowhere near the numbers of workforce in here. And then of course what happened was I got I went through a phase and I actually put this small electronics production area in. I've got mixed feelings about this because it was very much a quick fix, but I think it's actually a bit of an example of maybe producing electronics, and it comes back to what I was saying, is because produce the that's electro components, isn't it? I think is we need steel, chemicals, and plastics. Now these are with the exception of chemicals, these are plastics and steel can be shipped in fairly large quantities, and the chemicals slightly different, but again I'll talk about that later on. Rather than shipping the electronics, which also needs mechanical components and plastics, so again you've got 2 buildings that need plastics, and so my instinct going forward would be to have regional electronic production centers a bit like this, maybe a bit more optimized, and actually having them close to a proper rail connection that can deliver the basic components. And I think this is going to be the way forward, especially with the rail distribution offices, so that a little area here like this could supply electronics to, say, a couple of towns. I'm not saying about putting one in every town, but that is something that needs to be thought about. Now back to this vehicle production. Now if I was going to do this map again, the argument I've just put forward is exactly the same, because I am bringing a lot of the base resources into here, like the fabric and the electronics, and you can see we've got loads of plastics in here, and the plastics are manufactured on the other side of the map. And I built these here for mechanical components and steel, but these are easily transported. So what I would do if I was doing this map again is I would actually build a completely separate town that would support the vehicle production center. I would probably still keep the 2 together, but they would be in a totally different town, because I think I just overloaded the workforce here, because again you can see despite having a really big population in Stilton, it's just split up too much. So this is you could say is my failure from the perspective of over specialization. So coming up to Irontown, I think Irontown is one of their successes. It's worked very well. We've been able to keep a pretty good workforce in here, ensuring that we get a supply of iron ore down to the Stilton. I'm really happy with these 2 lines here, bringing in the coal and iron. The only thing I would say is, and this is one of the failures, is that you can't bring large quantities of iron ore and coal into this area with just one aggregate station. You do need a dedicated aggregate station. It makes life a lot easier. So and the only other thing I probably would do differently is that I would control these with rail distribution offices, because at the moment I get trains running backwards and forwards and waiting to offload here, because this is just still their normal manual rail setup. But Irontown, pretty good, worked well. Nuclear City, I would say it was a half a success. The idea was there, but I didn't plan the city very well. And I'm actually using helicopters and things to keep this place going. Be interested to see what the yeah, again, the happiness is low, the loyalty is low. Wow, the loyalty is very low here. And I think this is an example of the problem, that when you get a big economy, you need to play on normal speed and pay a lot of attention to these problems growing. Doing what I did was being totally focused on one subject, is let things get away, and it would take a lot of time to turn this around. This transport system I think did work quite well, and I don't think I would need metro over here, because the workforce in this area is not that big. I think the one mistake I did make here was I was way too ambitious with the nuclear fuel production, because I think the original thought was that I'd export it. But if I show you here, this whole side of the map here has never been used. All the nuclear fuel is being produced on this side. This was a bit of a bad mistake. I wasted a lot of resources building something that I've never used. The same with the containerization. It never really came together, because I think I've spent all this time building this up, but I've never got the production levels high enough to actually export nuclear fuel beyond a short brief thing when I was exporting a surplus. We got a growing problem here, because this open store is filling up. Whole area here is highly radioactive. Yeah, I never really thought that much about the waste disposal aspect. I suppose if I was going to do it again, I'd find an island way out, and then find some way, maybe using helicopters or something, to try and move the waste somewhere where I can completely forget about it. So moving on to this area here. Again, I would say this is one of my partial successes. The idea was brilliant, pretty good. And I think the positioning is really well, surrounded by fields. I think the problem I've got is that I didn't plan a big enough town here. And of course it's now boxed in by fields. So to kind of try and recover this, I would have to expand the town and take away some of these fields. This area worked, but again, I didn't really think about the long-term expansion. So what I really should have done is planned in 2 more food factories off of this silo, if I could have done it, and then built it as a more integrated system. Probably public transport wise, what's it, these need 170 workers. And I think this is quite an important point, that if you're planning large production areas here, bus services will work, but I'm not sure. I think you need to put a bit more focus on. I mean, this could be a possible candidate for a tram route delivering workers out to here, or maybe just as somebody suggested in the comments, a trolleybus route. So again, I'd say this is one of my partial successes. And then of course what we've got over here is something I'm not quite so proud of. It's poorly designed. I think I kind of got a bit carried away with the highway. I built this highway and it's not really being used, and it was a good experiment, which is what it was intended to be, but to be completely honest, I'm still not convinced that if you've got a well-designed delivery system, whether you really need highways. I think building highways in this game is more aesthetic. And if you've got to build a highway that's taking a large volumes of traffic, you've got to ask that question of why am I not moving things by train? So if you've got loads and loads of trucks going up and down here, you know, what are you doing wrong is probably the polite way of saying it. I feel the mistake I made here is that I kind of treated this as 2 towns. One was meant to supply the construction industry here, and then I tried to build a very concentrated tower block town here for the chemical factories. And again, I just didn't really plan the capacity here for I think these are kind of these trams again. But then again, we didn't have metro. I think the general layout of this area worked quite well. We got 4 mod chemical plants here, but this I don't like. It's never really worked. It's a bit clumsy. I put the actual rail distribution network over here. There's too much lost with moving. It comes back to what I was saying about the small quantities involved in chemicals, electronics. It's just messy is probably the polite way of saying it. And I say we'll talk a bit more about distribution in a little while. Oil distribution out here, it was okay. So I think I'll draw a veil over that. But of course, if I'd had my original plan of an oil refinery out here, I think it would have been a little bit better. Maybe what I should have done is built an oil town here. But I think I was got in a bit of a rush to get things done. I think this was an interesting experiment, but again, I think that this city, I call it a city because it's probably one of the biggest one I've actually planned. It suffers from trying to do too many things. I think the aircraft production factory should really have been needs to be in a different place. I think the bauxite production was slightly over ambitious. There's too much going on here, and of course what I've done is I've added extra industries on over here, like in this tourist area, and this is a good example of what happens when you're trying to supply those key resources to your economy, because of course this is providing meat. And I suppose in some ways it's a good and a bad example. It's a bad example in the sense that I cobbled this together to supplement the mistakes I made in Foodville, but at the same time I think having small production areas like this across the map to produce meat does work as long as you can get the food supplies in. And of course what I've got out here is another clothes factory which I put down. Overall I'm quite happy with the way the economy actually developed, but I think there's a lot of areas that I need to think a lot more carefully about, and I think that is a good segue into distribution. Now of course the big game changer for distribution, we go to Ollerton, was the addition of railway distribution offices. These are these lovely buildings here. If I was to say if there's any game-changing mechanic that's been introduced through the duration of this series, I would say it is the rail distribution offices, because I'll be completely upfront, before the introduction of rail distribution offices, I never really liked distributing goods by rail, because what you used to have is, well, it's similar to what was in Stilton. You'd set a rail line up, and then what you'd do is the rail trains would come in. They would grab stuff from output warehouses. Say, well, let's just talk about the fuel distribution system. That might explain it. So this is my one and only oil refinery, and that is quite surprisingly supplying all the fuel to the map. You can see we've got a nice steady production here, and I think if you've got a good workforce keeping an oil refinery busy like it is now, and you've got a strong support of oil, one refinery can supply the fuel and bitumen for the whole map. But it does come down to the distribution office. And prior to the rail distribution offices, what you tended to do was you'd build one of these, you'd set up manual lines that would come in here, grab the fuel from here or the bitumen from here, and then what you would do is send it to large central distribution offices like I've got down here at Knife Edge. And what you'd end up with is, especially if you've got reasonable efficiency, is you'd end up with trains running backwards and forwards between the two centres, keeping this tank full up. And that also applied to other goods. But what I found is that you do get this clumping of large quantities of goods piling up in regional storehouses. This is prior to rail distribution offices. It just made the distribution of goods across the map very clunky. Well, let me just group the products that you create in this map into 3 groups. You've got the high volume products. This is your construction materials: steel, prefabs, bricks, wood. Although wood is a bit of an exception because it's used in relatively small quantities, so local wood or plank production is still viable, and in fact shipping it all across the map is probably not kind of efficient. Also, one of the problems with wood is the fact that you've got if you've got a wood production process, all the trees get cut down and then it runs out. And I still wish that the devs would do something about giving us an arborist or someone, so we could actually still grow back the trees. So that's your bulk materials. And then the next level down is what you could call essential services. Now, in this category, I would put food and clothes, simply because this needs to go across the map, but it can be but it needs to be transported in relatively high volumes, especially food, because if you've got large cities, the food consumption gets the food gets consumed quite quickly. And then what you've got is what I would call the awkward squad. This is electronics and meat, because these are the items which are essential to your economy, but they don't need to be shipped in vast quantities, even with distribution offices. This is what's resulted in this problem here, that, like I said, I've got 238 tons of electronics around the map, 232 in buildings. The same with meat. I've got nearly 900 tons of meat put in stores spread across the map. Now, I'm pretty sure if I went right across the map, I'd find some places that were very low and other places with a stockpile that would probably last a couple of years. And that was always the problem with distributing with rail prior to just rail distribution offices. I'm not going to claim that the rail distribution offices have completely solved those problems, but what I've found by adding rail distribution offices is that they have two roles. One for bulk supply to regional distribution centres. This applies to like food, clothes, steel, all the construction projects. Then the delivery to small areas, which are the smaller items. Now, what I've found is that the bulk distribution works quite well. The smaller areas, it doesn't work quite so well, and I think the reason for that is that with these let's just talk about rail distribution offices. What I would say here is a good setup. I think if you're building a major production area, you need your key rail distribution offices next to that production area, because if you've got a train here, in fact, if I let the game run, I suppose no train's going to oblige me with running out. Well, let's just talk about this here. See, what you've got here is a rail train here. Now, if I show you here, and we go, the distribution office is here, and this is what you really need if you've got a major distribution pickup point, because it takes time for the train to run out to get here to pick up. So the shorter this distance is, the more efficient your distribution network is. Because an example of a bad setup is over here, because what you've got, what I did over here, and of course this is my first rail distribution offices, and I built these, but if I show you what these are picking up, you can see it's picking up coal. Coal's not too bad, but we've got electronics. Oh no, this is probably not a good example. I think this one's a bit better. See, this one's picking up alcohol and food in knife edge. So this distribution office is actually servicing this pickup point right over here. Now this is simply down to the fact that all this was built up, and I tried to get a rail distribution office in here, but I couldn't. And of course, something to bear in mind with realistic mode is that once you've got an established route, trying to get in a new line somewhere is quite difficult. So what actually happens is a train that's going to send out food leaves this depot, spends a lot of time running up to here to pick up the food, and then if it's going to go some distance, in fact, what you could have is it could go all the way back to Colville over here, or Stilton. So effectively what you're doing is doubling the journey time. Then of course, once it's dropped the delivery off, it's got to go back to the station. that return journey, the train isn't actually not delivering things, is the way to think of it. My recommendation is that when you set up a production area, what you need is something set up like this. In fact, what you'll find here is I've got 3 distribution offices here, all servicing the output from Ollerton here. This one is fuel, and again, I think this also segues into another key important fact is get your rail distribution offices to specialize. Don't put in too many mixed products, and in fact I think this one is probably a representation of the ideal. You can see all it does is deliver fuel and bitumen, and I think if you have a specialized distribution office, it works even better, I think. And this one is probably an example of a bad setup, because you can see it's picking up all sorts of bits and pieces and sending it across the map. And if we come in here, it's got 33 wagons, it's got hoppers, it's got tankers, it's got cement tanks, it's got box cars. Problem with this is that you can only have 8 trains. If you've got lots and lots of mixed goods, and again, an example here is that I'm moving gravel with I'm pretty sure in here is chemicals, and chemicals is being moved to Steelton now. So what you've got is the possibility of a large gravel train moving across, and then eventually and occasionally a small train with a box car going out. And of course what happens is that, and this is what's one of the vulnerabilities of the distribution station, if an area gets a shortage of something like chemicals or meat, what can happen is you get a whole flurry of little trains coming out here with just one wagon attached to it, and then that actually slows down the other delivery processes. Now the next thing about distribution offices that I found is that if you've got a major production area like this where we got a refinery, don't mix your inbound supplies with your outbound supplies. That's a mistake I made here in the beginning. What you need to do is, like this distribution office is actually bringing in the oil from the oil field that's up there. Building something like an oil refinery that is going to be your central supply, you need 2 rail distribution offices, simply because you need one to bring the oil in, and that needs to be completely focused on bringing the oil in, and then you need the second one to actually distribute the fuel across the map. And the other thing I would say is that if you're going to have an export market, which is what I've done over here, if I come up here again, the distribution office is a little bit in the wrong place, but it's not that important. Is that if you're going to run an export market using rail distribution offices, again, you need to keep this separate, because you need to set the percentages of the pickup so that you can ship stuff to the border. You don't want to mix this with a say for a example a general rail distribution. You can't set the settings for pickups and in very well. And the second reason for doing this is if you know that this is a distribution office, and an example of this I've actually had to do since the end of the last video is that I had to adjust the pickup points for steel. And you can see that this office exports steel, clothes, and mechanical components. But what I did was I had to increase this a bit to keep the steel under control. In fact, you can probably go down a bit now. I don't know if that will wake up the train. I mean, there's only 2 trains here anyways. That's the key points with rail distribution offices, is build them close to where the source is. Specialize them, especially with key industries and products, and also don't overload them. Be aware of what they're doing. That now leads into what the final subject on distribution, which is what I would say is the awkward squad. I don't think having a big central production area like I did over here really works, unless you've got a very big logistics center here. Again, I've got a single distribution office here, but it's got too many different products on it. It's doing the imports, it's doing a bit of distribution. It's just a bit of a mess. So if you're going to go for chemicals or meat, and you want a big central area, in fact, meat I would never recommend doing that. The same as electronics, but maybe chemicals you could do it. Make sure you would need at least 2 distribution offices, one to control the import of the raw materials, and 2 to do the distribution. In light of the water purification requirements, you're probably going to need 3 distribution offices, one for the bringing the raw materials in, and 2 for distributing the chemicals across the map, because what you'd have to do is ship the chemicals, a bit like what I've done up here. Is what you would need to do is bring the chemicals into a regional depot, which I've used here. So for this area, what's happening is all the chemicals are being brought into here, and then these chemicals are being distributed to this city here. I think it's now being distributed to here, and with a slightly long kind of transport system, I think the chemicals are also being brought to here now. And then that just leaves meat and electronics. Now, to me, if you're building a large economy, meat and electronics is the nightmare scenario, especially electronics, because prior to the crime and justice update, you could virtually ignore electronics because the happiness could always be 80-90%. But now towns that don't get a regular supply of electronics, you can still get by, but the happiness is a lot lower. I mean, I've only got 76-75% happiness here. Bear in mind that this town is close to where the electronics are being produced. So even with electronics, I'm only getting 75-76%. I know I can improve that using other advantages. Electronics is key to keeping a large economy happy, stable, and more importantly productive. The problem is that electronics needs to be distributed in such small amounts. My inclination is to have more kind of local setups like this, where you're actually producing the electronics locally and then bringing in the raw materials. I mean, this isn't perfect because it really needs a direct rail, a proper rail connection. Even the electro components, I haven't really mentioned those. Electro components are in small quantities, but they're the type of thing that you can ship around if you wanted to, similar to plastics. So it's possible that, considering all you need for, you need so much for electronics. Maybe producing the electro components is quite key, but you can see you actually need plastics, electro components, mechanical components. Now the mechanical components can be shipped in bulk. So I think so can be the plastics if you've got a central oil product center. But I just feel that what you could do is just produce these electronics locally and then distribute them. And by locally, I'm kind of stretching the point a little bit. What you need to do is look at the capacity of the electronics factory. I mean, this is 1.4 tons of electronics, which is probably only just barely enough to keep Stilton going. I don't know. It's a bit difficult sometimes to work out the consumption, because it's one of those areas where the rate which people use them is quite different. I think, yeah, I mean they're quite happy here, and as far as I know, it's this electronics factory here is actually supplying Stilton, and it's also exporting a bit as well. So thank you, game. So I think if you had several of these little setups spread across the map into regional areas, and then I think what you'd need is a dedicated distribution office with trucks in it that would then send the electronics either to the local shops, or as in the case of well, up here I'm distributing up to here as well, and I think this is working okay. These are actually topped up by trucks, and I still feel that I need to do more work on it. Now meat, I think I just saw a good example. I mean, this, if we come in here, I still feel that for key centers, this solution here with a dedicated refrigerator truck going to a shop with a quite a large pile of meat on it and sitting there is probably the way to go forward. I mean this stores 5 tons. Maybe it's not really necessary for this corner market, because 5 tons could easily be delivered by a distribution office, but some shops are quite small with meat, and I think this is still the best solution. And then of course that delivery process would be supported by regional meat stores, which I've got here. And you can see, and what this meat store is actually doing is it's supplying Irontown, it supplies Stilton, and it also supplies Colville over here. So this is the meat distribution hub that's being brought into here, which is getting keep full up. So what you're talking about is a distribution system that breaks down through levels. So you could still have meat production areas like Foodville, but they really need to be fully connected in, like the new one I've built. They can then send meat to these regional stores, and then what you need is trucks. Then trucks can onward deliver stuff, but the problem is that it's still a little bit vulnerable. So I wouldn't put all my eggs in one basket, and I think this is probably the key. For a constant drag on your economy, if you're not delivering meat, electronics and chemicals, then you just can't build that economy up. Apologies, I've probably rambled on a lot longer than I actually intended. And just in final conclusion, I'm quite happy the way that this economy is built up, and I'm hoping to replicate it in the next series. And I think in many ways this series has been a very good learning curve from the perspective of distributing over a large network. So moving on to the final part in this video, I'm going to talk about the way forward. This series will continue to have a life. I will keep playing it off camera. It may come back occasionally if I encounter something that I want to talk about. Also, it's going to be my reserve series for any new updates that come out, just in case that the new series isn't in a position to demonstrate it. The new series is going to be realistic mode. It's going to be on a brand new map that I've just created for the purpose. It's going to be an early start, which at the moment is going to be around the 1930s. I think 1900 is a little bit too early, and I'm hoping that with a 1930-35 start, it will be able to develop quite quickly. Reason for the early start is that I'm hooked on them now. I find it very difficult to start in 1960. Plus, I want to take a slightly different slant on the realistic mode from the point of view of telling a story, just rather than just ploughing in 1960 and building the ideal city. Although if any of you guys are interested in that, I am thinking about doing a short tutorial-like series where I'll be talking about the issues around realistic mode, and that may be my next project, which will slot between this series and the new bigger realistic series. Anyway, this is where I'm going to leave it. Hope you enjoyed the video, hope you enjoyed the series. Any comments, opinions on what I've been talking about and also the near series, feel free to chuck it in the video comments and we'll have a chat about it. But until next time, whatever you do, enjoy your gaming.